My name is Sergeant Marcus Thorne, 3rd Platoon, Cadian 217th Infantry Regiment. Or at least that's who I was when the Imperium still remembered we existed. Now I'm just another forgotten soldier on a planet whose name doesn't appear on Imperial star charts anymore, waiting for rescue ships that will never come, leading men and women who died for the Emperor and received abandonment as their reward. They don't tell you this in the recruitment propaganda. They show you heroic charges, glorious victories, soldiers returning home to celebrations and honors. They show you the Guard at its finest, disciplined, equipped, victorious, backed by the infinite resources of the Imperium of Man. They don't show you what happens when the war moves on and you're still here. When the supply ships stop coming because your world is no longer strategically relevant. When the extraction transports are redirected to more important theaters because 10,000 soldiers stranded on a dead world are an acceptable loss. When you realize that the Emperor protects is a comfortable lie and the truth is much simpler. The Emperor protects what's useful. Everything else gets abandoned. We've been forgotten on Hadrian's Rest for 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. I know because I've been counting. Someone needs to remember how long we've been waiting. How long we've been surviving on a planet that was supposed to be a temporary deployment. How long we've been hoping the Imperium would remember its own soldiers. The initial force was 27,000 Guard from 4 different regiments. We were sent to clear an orc infestation, secure the planet's adamantium mines, and prepare for Imperial colonization. The campaign took 8 months. We won. We secured the mines. We eliminated the orc presence. Then the Imperium simply forgot about us. The supply ships stopped coming. The colonization fleet was redirected. The extraction transports never arrived, and 27,000 soldiers were left on a world with no infrastructure, depleting supplies and the slow realization that we'd been written off as a logistical inconvenience. Now there are 6,347 of us left. The rest are dead, from starvation, disease, accident, suicide, or the violence that emerges when soldiers realize they've been abandoned by the empire they bled for. We've buried more of our own than the orcs ever killed. This is my testimony. My record of what happens when the Astra Militarum wins a war and then forgets the soldiers who won it. My account of what acceptable losses actually means when you're the loss being accepted. The Emperor protects, they told us. He doesn't protect the forgotten. He never has. We won the Battle of Hadrian's Rest in 8 months, 17 days, and approximately 43,000 casualties across all Imperial forces involved. I remember the victory celebration. Commissar Yevgeny standing on the ruins of the Orc warlord's fortress, declaring that we'd secured another world for the Emperor's glory. The regimental flags raised above smoking rubble. The brief moment where we actually believed that our sacrifice had mattered, that the deaths of thousands of our comrades had purchased something worth having. Guardsmen of the Imperium, Yevgeny had proclaimed, his augmetic voice amplifier carrying his words across the assembled survivors. You have fought with honor. You have bled for humanity. You have proven that the Emperor's armies are invincible when led with courage and faith. Hadrian's Rest is secured. The orcs are broken, and the Imperium's gratitude will be eternal. We cheered because that's what you did after 8 months of hell. We'd lost friends, suffered wounds, watched brothers and sisters die screaming in mud that was half water and half blood. But we'd won. The orcs were dead or scattered. The adamantium mines were intact. The planet was ready for Imperial colonization. Victory felt good, even through the exhaustion. That was 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days ago. I didn't know then that eternal gratitude translated to abandoned on a dead world while the Imperium moves on to more important conflicts. The first sign something was wrong came 2 weeks after the victory declaration. The supply ships were supposed to arrive every 72 hours, standard protocol for guard forces post-campaign. Food, medical supplies, ammunition, replacement equipment, everything an army needed to maintain itself while awaiting extraction orders. The first missed delivery was explained as a logistical delay. Warp travel was unpredictable, they said. Sometimes ships arrived late, nothing to worry about. The second missed delivery raised concerns among the command staff, but the official line remained optimistic. Temporary routing issues. The supply fleet would arrive soon. By the third missed delivery, even the optimists were worried. "Lieutenant Cross," I'd said to my company commander after the third week without supplies, "what happens if the ships don't come?" Cross had been Cadian, real Cadian from before the planet broke, and he'd seen enough campaigns to know when something was wrong. His augmetic eye clicked as it focused on me, processing data I couldn't see. "Then we ration what we have and wait for extraction," he'd replied. "Command says the transports are scheduled to arrive in 6 weeks. We can last 6 weeks on reduced rations." "And if the transports don't come either," I'd pressed. He'd given me a look that soldiers learn to recognize. The expression of someone who knows the truth but can't say it without causing panic. "Then we improvise, Sergeant, we're guard. Improvisation is what we do." The supply ships never came. Neither did the extraction transports. 6 weeks became 8, became 12, became 6 months, and slowly we realized that Hadrian's Rest wasn't a temporary deployment anymore. It was a permanent assignment that no one had bothered to tell us about. The official explanation from the regimental command was temporary logistical delays due to priority theater reallocation. Imperial forces were needed elsewhere. The cicatrix maledictum had torn the galaxy in half, creating emergencies that required immediate response. Hadrian's Rest was secured, stable, and therefore low priority for resource allocation. "We're victims of our own success," Colonel Marstein had explained during a General Assembly 6 months after victory. "We pacified this world so effectively that the Departamento Munitorum has classified it as a secure Imperial holding requiring minimal oversight. Extraction protocols are being processed, but they're in queue behind more urgent deployments." "How long until extraction?" someone had shouted from the assembled ranks. "Unknown," Marstein had admitted. "Could be months, could be a year. But rest assured, the Imperium hasn't forgotten us. We simply need to maintain order and await our turn for transport allocation." The lie was so obvious that even the most indoctrinated guardsmen saw through it. The Imperium had forgotten us. We just hadn't been officially classified as abandoned yet. The first death from starvation came in month 7. Private Kellen, a kid from Mordia who'd only been in the Guard for 2 years. He'd been giving his rations to wounded soldiers in the medici tent, believing they needed them more. Noble, stupid, fatal. We buried him in what we'd started calling the Forgotten Field, a section of cleared orc territory where we'd been interring our dead since the supply ships stopped coming. The ecclesiarchy priest assigned to our regiment, Father Dominicus, performed the rites with the same mechanical efficiency he'd developed after presiding over 347 funerals in 7 months. "The Emperor recognizes your sacrifice," Dominicus intoned, his voice carrying less conviction with each repetition. "Your service is recorded in the Great Ledger. Your soul ascends to the Golden Throne. The Emperor protects." I'd wanted to scream at him. To demand he explain how the Emperor was protecting a soldier who'd starved to death while waiting for the rescue that never came. To force him to justify the comfortable lies we kept telling ourselves. But I said nothing. Because what was the point? We were all complicit in the fiction that this was temporary, That extraction was coming, that the Imperium valued our lives beyond our utility. Kellen was buried with 17 others who died that week. 3 from disease, 6 from accidents, 4 from suicide, 2 from fights over rations, and 2 from simple despair manifesting as biological shutdown. Acceptable losses by Imperial standards. Except these weren't combat losses, these were soldiers dying from neglect. By month 12, we'd established what Command euphemistically called sustainable survival protocols. Translation: we'd started farming, hunting, and scavenging to supplement the rapidly depleting supplies we'd been left with. 27,000 soldiers attempting to feed themselves on a world that had been strip-mined by the orcs, its ecosystem destroyed by decades of industrial exploitation. The adamantium mines we'd secured proved useful in ways the Imperium probably didn't intend. The mining equipment could be repurposed for agricultural use. The underground tunnels provided shelter. And the ore itself could be traded. We'd discovered a few smuggler outfits willing to land on an abandoned Imperial world if the price was right. "This is heresy," Commissar Yevgeny had declared when he discovered we were trading Imperial resources to non-sanctioned merchants. "You're stealing from the Emperor. The punishment is execution." "Then execute all 6,000 of us," Lieutenant Cross had replied, his augmetic eye burning with something between rage and desperation. "Because everyone's complicit. We're trading adamantium for food and medical supplies that the Imperium isn't providing. Would you prefer we starve waiting for rescue ships that aren't coming?" The standoff had lasted 3 minutes before Yevgeny backed down. Not because he was convinced, but because executing 6,000 soldiers for the crime of trying to survive would leave him alone on a dead world. Even commissars needed armies. "This is temporary," he'd said finally. "Once extraction arrives, anyone involved in unauthorized trade will face tribunal. Until then, I will classify this as emergency resource requisition under exceptional circumstances." Translation: he'd pretend not to notice as long as we pretended it wasn't happening. The Imperium ran on comfortable fictions. We'd just gotten better at creating them. The suicide started in month 15. Not a wave, the guards' discipline was too strong for that, but a steady trickle. 1 or 2 soldiers per week simply deciding that waiting for rescue they didn't believe in anymore wasn't worth continuing to exist. Private Henna walked into the wilderness and didn't come back. Her body was found 3 days later, lasgun beside her, single shot through the temple. Corporal Dax hanged himself in the barracks using equipment webbing, leaving a note that just said, "I'm tired." Sergeant Volkov from the Valhallans drank cleaning chemicals from the medici tent. The chirurgeon said he was dead before they could administer treatment. Father Dominicus tried to minister to the survivors, offering prayers and assurances that the Emperor valued their lives. But his sermons were becoming hollow even to him. You could hear it in his voice. The slow erosion of faith as reality ground against doctrine and doctrine lost. "The Emperor has a plan," he'd say during services that fewer soldiers attended each week. "Our suffering has purpose. Our wait has meaning. We must maintain faith that—" "Bullshit," someone interrupted during one service. I never identified who. "The Emperor doesn't have a plan for us. We're forgotten, abandoned, left to die on a world that doesn't matter anymore. And you're just telling us comfortable lies to keep us compliant while we starve." Dominicus had no response. What could he say? That the Emperor actually was protecting us despite all evidence to the contrary? That our abandonment was part of some grand design we couldn't comprehend? The lies had gotten too big to maintain. He'd simply ended the service early and retreated to his quarters. I heard later that he'd started drinking heavily, what little alcohol we could produce from native plants. Even the priesthood had its breaking point. By year 2, we'd lost nearly half our original strength. 13,000 dead from disease, starvation, accidents, suicide, violence, or simply giving up. We'd gone from an army to a survival colony, from soldiers awaiting extraction to people trying not to die on a planet that wanted us dead. The command structure was fragmenting. Colonel Marstein still gave orders, but his authority was theoretical rather than practical. The regiment had splintered into factions based on survival philosophy and resource control. The Loyalists, about 2,000 soldiers, remained convinced that extraction was coming. They maintained military discipline, preserved what little equipment remained functional, and insisted we needed to be ready when the Imperium returned for us. Commissar Yevgeny led this faction, though his authority was enforced more through violence than respect. The pragmatists, approximately 3,000, had accepted that we were permanently stranded and focused on long-term survival. Building sustainable agriculture, establishing trade networks with smugglers, fortifying settlements. Lieutenant Cross led this group, and I'd thrown my lot in with them. Better to survive than die waiting for rescue that would never come. The desperates, maybe 1,000, had descended into something between banditry and insanity. They raided other factions for supplies, killed without hesitation, and operated on the logic that since the Imperium had abandoned us, all previous rules were void. They were former guardsmen turned feral, and they were probably the most honest about our situation. We were abandoned, forgotten, and reduced to whatever we could take from each other. The rest, about 300, were unaffiliated. Hermits who'd walked away from all factions to die alone. Small groups trying to remain neutral. Individuals too broken or apathetic to care which faction controlled what territory. We're not an army anymore, I told Cross during a strategy meeting. We're survivors of an army that died but doesn't know it yet. Then we survive, he'd replied grimly. That's all we can do. The Imperium forgot us, fine. We remember ourselves. We keep as many people alive as possible until either rescue comes or we all finally die. That's the mission now. It wasn't inspiring, but it was honest. And honesty was the only currency that still had value on Hadrian's Rest. Year 3 was when I finally accepted the truth I'd been avoiding since month 6. We were never getting rescued. The Imperium hadn't temporarily forgotten us. They'd permanently written us off. Some bureaucrat in the Departamento Munitorum had calculated that 6,000 stranded soldiers weren't worth the resources required for extraction. We'd been classified as acceptable losses, our death certificates filed, our equipment marked as lost in action, and our existence erased from active Imperial records. We'd won the war, secured the planet, and our reward was being left to die on the world we'd bled to capture. The Emperor protects, I said to Lieutenant Cross one night, the phrase bitter in my mouth. That's what they told us. That's what we believed. That service to the Imperium meant something. That our sacrifice would be honored. It meant something, Cross replied, his augmetic eye glowing in the darkness. It meant we were useful until we weren't. And when we stopped being useful, we stopped mattering. That's the only protection the Imperium offers, temporary utility. Once you're no longer useful, you're just ammunition that's been spent. So we were always disposable, I said. Everyone in the Guard is disposable, he corrected. We just had the misfortune of being disposed of through abandonment instead of honorable death in combat. Makes it harder to pretend it was noble. We sat in silence after that, watching Hadrian's Rest's twin moons rise over a planet that had become our grave. Not dead yet, but dying slowly, forgotten by an Imperium that had moved on to more important wars. Somewhere across the galaxy, soldiers were fighting and dying for the Emperor, believing their service mattered, believing they'd be remembered, believing the Imperium valued their lives. We'd believed that too once, before we learned that belief and truth were very different things, and that the Emperor only protects what's useful to protect. Everything else just dies slowly, wondering what it did wrong to deserve abandonment. The war between factions started in year 3, month 2. Not officially, there was no declaration, no formal breakdown of Imperial authority, no moment where someone said, the old rules no longer apply. It happened gradually, like rot spreading through timber. One disputed supply cache led to a fight. One fight led to casualties. Casualties led to retribution. And suddenly we weren't just surviving on Hadrian's Rest anymore. We were killing each other. The incident that ignited everything was almost mundane. A pragmatist patrol discovered a cache of preserved rations in the ruins of an old orc settlement. Approximately 300 units of Imperial Guard standard issue, probably from the initial invasion supplies. In a world where food was the difference between survival and starvation, 300 ration packs might as well have been a fortune. The patrol brought the cache back to pragmatist territory, intending to distribute it through our rationing system. Fair shares, controlled allocation. The same protocols we'd been using for 2 years to keep our faction alive. The Loyalists disagreed. All Imperial property belongs to the regimental command, Commissar Yevgeny declared when he learned about the cache. You will surrender those rations immediately for proper military distribution. We found them, Lieutenant Cross replied during the tense meeting in what used to be the command building. Our people risked their lives searching that sector. By what authority do you claim them? By the authority of the God Emperor of mankind and the regulations of the Astra Militarum, Yevgeny responded, his hand resting on his bolt pistol. I am the ranking commissar. Imperial property falls under my jurisdiction. Refusal to comply constitutes theft and insubordination. You're the ranking commissar of a regiment the Imperium forgot, Cross shot back, his augmetic eye blazing. The regulations don't apply anymore because we're not an active military unit. We're survivors, and survivors don't owe obedience to authorities that abandoned them. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That's sedition, Yevgeny said quietly, his bolt pistol clearing its holster. I could execute you right now for that statement. You could try, Cross replied, and I saw his hand move toward his own sidearm. Behind him, the 5 pragmatist guards we'd brought shifted their weapons into ready positions. But I have 5 soldiers with lasguns aimed at you, so maybe we find a solution that doesn't involve anyone dying over 300 ration packs. The standoff lasted 37 seconds, I counted, before Yevgeny holstered his weapon. This isn't over, he said. The regulations exist for a reason. Without order, without discipline, we descend into chaos. I will recover those rations, Lieutenant, one way or another. He left with his own guards, and I knew we'd just crossed a line we couldn't uncross. That was a mistake, I told Cross after the Loyalists departed. You basically declared independence from Imperial authority. Yevgeny won't let that stand. Yevgeny can't let that stand, Cross corrected. His entire worldview depends on maintaining the fiction that we're still an active guard regiment following regulations. Admitting those regulations don't apply anymore means admitting the Imperium abandoned us. He'd rather die than accept that truth. So we're at war now, I said. Guardsmen killing guardsmen over food. We've been at war since the first time someone starved to death while waiting for rescue, Cross replied. This is just the first time we're being honest about it. The raids started 3 days later. Loyalist squads began hitting pragmatist supply depots, taking what they claimed was rightfully Imperial property and leaving casualties when resistance was encountered. We retaliated, targeting their agriculture sites and water purification stations. The desperates took advantage of the chaos to raid both factions, operating like the orc raiders we'd spent 8 months eliminating. Within 2 weeks, we'd lost more soldiers to factional violence than we'd lost in the previous 6 months to disease and starvation combined. "This is insane," I said during a pragmatist leadership meeting. "We're killing each other over resources that wouldn't matter if the Imperium just sent one supply ship. One ship. That's all it would take to end this." "But they won't," Cross replied grimly. "We've sent distress signals. We've maintained the communication equipment. We've done everything possible to remind the Imperium we exist. And they've ignored us for 3 years. They're not coming, Marcus. And the longer we wait for salvation that won't arrive, the more we'll tear ourselves apart." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "We win," he said simply. "We consolidate control over Hadrian's Rest's resources. We eliminate or absorb the other factions. We build something sustainable enough to survive indefinitely. And we stop waiting for the Imperium to save us." "You're talking about a military coup," I observed. "Overthrowing Imperial authority and establishing independent control." "I'm talking about survival," Cross corrected. "Yevgeny's clinging to regulations that don't matter anymore. The desperates are descending into cannibalistic anarchy. If we don't take control, everyone dies, slowly, violently, and for absolutely no reason. At least if we're in charge, we can build something that lasts." I looked around the room at the other pragmatist leaders, saw the same calculation happening behind their eyes. We'd all been Imperial guardsmen once, sworn to serve the Emperor, trained to follow orders without question. But the Imperium had broken that contract first. They'd abandoned us, left us to die, written us off as acceptable losses. Did we still owe them loyalty after that? "If we do this," I said slowly, "we're not Imperial Guard anymore. We're insurgents, traitors. If the Imperium ever does return, they'll execute us all." "If the Imperium returns," Cross said, "they'll find 6,000 corpses if we don't take action now. Dead traitors or dead loyalists, either way we're dead. But at least as traitors we have a chance at survival." The vote was unanimous. We went to war against our own command structure. The Battle of Command Hill lasted 3 days. The Loyalists had fortified the old regimental headquarters, a structure built from salvaged orc materials that had become the symbolic center of Imperial authority on Hadrian's Rest. Commissar Yevgeny commanded approximately 1,800 soldiers who still believed in the regulations, in the chain of command, in the idea that maintaining discipline would somehow summon rescue. We had 3,000 pragmatists who'd accepted that survival required abandoning the old rules. The mathematics favored us, but numbers don't guarantee victory when you're fighting brothers and sisters who fought beside you for years. "I don't want to do this," Private Kellis said as we prepared for the assault. She'd been with me since the initial invasion, survived the orc campaign, watched friends starve during the abandonment, and now she was checking her lasguns charge to kill other guardsmen. "These are our people. We trained together, bled together." "I know," I replied, because what else could I say? She was right. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. But wrong didn't matter when the alternative was everyone dying. "Listen up," I addressed my platoon. 37 soldiers down from the original 120 that had deployed to Hadrian's Rest. The Loyalists won't surrender. They believe they're defending Imperial authority. They'll fight to the death because that's what the regulations demand. So we end this quickly. Minimize casualties on both sides. Aim for suppression, not kills. We're trying to break their will to fight, not exterminate them. "And if they don't break?" someone asked. "Then we do what we have to do," I replied. "But we give them every chance to surrender first." The assault began at dawn. or what passed for dawn on a world with a dim, dying sun that barely rose above the horizon. We came from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming the Loyalist perimeter through sheer numbers and coordinated fire. The fighting was brutal in ways the Orc campaign never was. Orcs were easy to kill because they were alien, monstrous, obviously enemies. But the Loyalists were human. They wore the same uniforms we did. They used the same equipment. They shouted the same battle cries we'd all learned during training. Killing them felt like murder, because it was. I shot Commissar Yevgeny personally. We'd broken through the headquarters' main entrance, fighting room to room against defenders who used tactics we'd taught each other. The casualties were mounting on both sides, not from incompetence, but from the terrible efficiency of soldiers who knew exactly how their enemies would fight because we'd all learned from the same instructors. I found Yevgeny in what used to be Colonel Marstein's office. The colonel himself was dead, killed in the first hour of fighting when an artillery shell hit the headquarters east wing. Yevgeny had assumed command and was directing the defense with the same cold competence that had kept us alive during the Orc campaign. "Sergeant Thorne," he said when I entered, my lasgun trained on him. His bolt pistol was already holstered. He'd expended his ammunition defending the stairwell. "Come to execute me for the crime of maintaining Imperial discipline?" "Come to offer you a chance to surrender," I replied. "Your defense has collapsed. Most of your soldiers have thrown down their weapons. This is over. Don't make me kill you." "I can't surrender," Yevgeny said simply. "The regulations are clear. A commissar who abandons his duty is to be executed by the next ranking commissar. Since there are no other commissars on Hadrian's Rest, I'll simply have to execute myself once you leave." "The regulations don't apply anymore," I said, repeating Cross's words. "The Imperium abandoned us. We're not bound by rules created for an army that no longer exists." "The regulations always apply," Yevgeny replied with absolute conviction. "They're not contingent on Imperial presence. They're expressions of eternal truth, order over chaos, discipline over anarchy, faith over despair. If we abandon them, we abandon what makes us human." "We abandoned them when we started killing each other over food," I countered. "No," he disagreed. "You abandoned them when you decided survival was more important than duty. I maintained them because duty is the only thing that separates us from the Orcs we destroyed. If I surrender now, I'm admitting that might makes right, that regulations are optional, that the Imperium's authority is contingent on its presence. I can't do that. I won't." He stood, arms at his sides, unarmed but refusing to submit. "So shoot me," he said. "Execute me for the crime of believing in something beyond survival. But know that you're killing the last representative of Imperial authority on this world. After me, you're just bandits with guard uniforms pretending your rebellion has legitimacy." I could have arrested him, could have imprisoned him, kept him alive but neutralized as a threat. That would have been the pragmatic choice and the option that preserved the most lives. But I looked into his eyes and saw something I'd lost months ago. Absolute certainty. He knew he was right, knew that maintaining Imperial discipline, even on an abandoned world, even when it required dying, was worth doing. And I envied him for it. Because I wasn't sure of anything anymore except that I wanted to survive. I shot him twice in the chest, standard execution protocol, quick, professional, exactly as regulations demanded. He died with his faith intact, convinced he was right to the end. I survived knowing I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. The Battle of Command Hill ended with the Loyalists' surrender 4 hours after Yevgeny's death. Final casualties: 247 pragmatists dead, 391 wounded. 412 Loyalists dead, 603 wounded. Combined total: Over 1,000 casualties in 3 days of fighting over who controlled a planet the Imperium had forgotten. We'd killed more of each other in 3 days than the orcs had killed in 8 months. Was it worth it? I asked Lieutenant Cross as we surveyed the aftermath. He looked at me with his augmetic eye, its mechanical components clicking as it processed data I couldn't see. Ask me in 5 years, he replied. If we're still alive, still maintaining something resembling civilization, still managing to keep people fed and safe, then maybe it was worth it. If we're all dead or descended into complete savagery, then we murdered our brothers for nothing. And if the Imperium returns? If the Imperium returns, Cross said, they'll find either a functioning colony of former guardsmen who've maintained order through necessary force, or they'll find corpses and ruins. Either way, we'll be executed for what we did today. So we'd better make sure our survival justifies the price we paid for it. We buried Commissar Yevgeny in the Forgotten Field with the honors due his rank. Father Dominicus performed the rites, though his voice carried even less conviction than usual. The priesthood had been decimated during the fighting, 12 priests dead, including Dominicus's second-in-command. Those who remained were too traumatized or disillusioned to maintain the comfortable fictions about imperial benevolence. Commissar Yevgeny died believing in the Imperium, Dominicus said during the eulogy. He maintained discipline when discipline was difficult. He preserved order when order was costly. He served the Emperor until his final breath. Whether his service was wise or foolish, necessary or wasteful, that's not for us to judge. We simply record that he never stopped believing, even when faith became fatal. The survivors of the Loyalist faction stood at attention, their expressions mixing grief with resignation. They'd lost their leader, their cause, and their certainty that following regulations would somehow summon rescue. What remained was just the hollow obligation to continue existing in a world that no longer made sense. The Emperor protects, Dominicus concluded, the phrase sounding more like a question than a statement. No one responded. What was there to say? We all knew the Emperor hadn't protected Yevgeny. Hadn't protected the 1,000 soldiers who died in 3 days of pointless fighting. Hadn't protected any of us from the slow grinding horror of abandonment. The Emperor only protected what he deemed worth protecting, and we'd stopped being worth protecting the moment the war moved on without us. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Yevgeny's face as I pulled the trigger, the absolute certainty in his eyes, the conviction that dying for regulations was noble, even when those regulations served an Imperium that had forgotten us. Was he right? Was maintaining discipline and faith worth dying for, even in abandonment? Or was Cross right? That survival justified anything, that pragmatism trumped principle, that adapting to reality was wiser than dying for ideals? I didn't know. All I knew was that I'd killed a man who believed in something, and I'd done it to preserve a survival that might not even be worth preserving. The Emperor protects, I whispered to the darkness, testing the words. They felt like lies. Because if the Emperor was protecting anyone on Hadrian's Rest, he was doing it so quietly that his protection was indistinguishable from complete abandonment. By year 4, we'd established what Lieutenant Cross called sustainable governance, and what I privately thought of as organized decline. The pragmatist faction, now just called the settlement because pretending we were still guards seemed increasingly absurd, controlled approximately 60% of Hadrian's Rest's habitable zones. We'd absorbed most of the surviving loyalists, eliminated or driven off the worst of the desperates, and established something that resembled civilization if you squinted and ignored the mass graves. Our population had stabilized at approximately 4,300. Not growing, birth rates were catastrophically low, and infant mortality was high enough that most pregnancies ended in grief. but not collapsing as rapidly as before. We'd learned to farm the planet's toxic soil using techniques scavenged from orc agricultural methods, which was humiliating but effective. We'd established trade networks with passing smugglers, exchanging adamantium for medicine and equipment the Imperium no longer provided. We'd built infrastructure, created laws, and maintained enough order that people could die of old age rather than violence. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like we'd become very efficient at surviving in a grave. Census results, Cross said during our weekly leadership meeting, his augmetic eye projecting data across the wall. 4,273 current population, down from 4,312 last month. 39 deaths, 17 from disease, 11 from accidents, 7 from violence, 4 from suicide. 12 births, but only 3 survived past the first week. So we're still losing ground, I observed, slowly but consistently. The mathematics are clear, Cross replied. At current rates, we have approximately 40 to 60 years before the population drops below sustainable levels. After that, we enter terminal decline. Too few people to maintain infrastructure, which creates more deaths, which reduces population further, cascading until extinction. 60 years, someone said. That's 2 generations. Our grandchildren will be the last humans on Hadrian's Rest. If we're lucky, Cross corrected. That's assuming no major disasters, no disease outbreaks, no factional violence worse than what we're currently experiencing. Any significant setback could accelerate the timeline considerably. The room fell silent as we processed that information. We'd fought so hard to survive, killed our own brothers, abandoned Imperial regulations, built a functioning colony from nothing. And it was all temporary. We'd bought ourselves decades, not centuries. Our victory was just slow-motion extinction with better organization. There has to be another option, I said, some way to reverse the decline, increase birth rates, reduce mortality, something. We've tried, Cross replied. Medical care is already prioritized for pregnant women and children. We've established incentives for reproduction. We've done everything possible with our limited resources. But we're working with a population that's been traumatized, malnourished, and exposed to environmental toxins for 4 years. Human biology has limits. Then we need more people, I said. We need to find other abandoned guard units, other forgotten colonies, anyone who can increase our population base. I've been scanning for Imperial distress signals for 3 years, our communications officer reported. There's nothing within range. Either we're the only forgotten guard unit in this sector, or the others are too far away to contact. What about the smugglers? Someone suggested. Could we recruit from them? Offer citizenship in exchange for permanent settlement? The smugglers are here for trade, not relocation, Cross said. Most are criminals fleeing Imperial justice. They're not looking to join a dying colony of former guardsmen on a toxic world. And even if some agreed, we'd be importing criminals into a barely stable society. That's its own risk. So we're trapped, I said. We can't grow the population fast enough to reverse decline. We can't leave because we have no ships. We can't get rescued because the Imperium forgot us. We're just waiting to go extinct. Yes, Cross agreed. That's the situation. We can manage the decline, make it slower and less painful. Give people decades of reasonable existence before the end. But we can't prevent it. Not with our current resources. The meeting concluded with no solutions. Only the same slow, grinding acceptance that we'd all been developing for 4 years. We were dead. We just hadn't finished dying yet. I found Father Dominicus in what used to be the regimental chapel, a building we'd repurposed as a community center because attendance at religious services had dropped so low it couldn't justify dedicated space. He was drinking. Again. The locally produced alcohol we'd learned to ferment from native plants. Terrible stuff that tasted like industrial runoff but got you drunk efficiently. "Sergeant Thorne," he greeted me, his words slightly slurred. "Come to confess your sins, or perhaps to add another to the collection. We've got quite a list now. Murder of Imperial commissars, abandonment of regulations trading with criminals, building a heretical colony outside Imperial authority. We're very accomplished sinners, you and I." "I came to ask about faith," I said, sitting across from him. "You've been a priest for how long?" 37 years, he replied. "Ordained at 17. Served with the Guard for 20 years before assignment to the 217th. Believed every word I preached for most of that time. The Emperor protects. Service is sacred. Sacrifice has meaning. All the comfortable lies we tell soldiers to make dying bearable." "And now?" I asked. "Now I drink and pretend I still believe," he said, taking another pull from his bottle. "Because if I admit it's all lies, that the Emperor doesn't protect, that our service was meaningless, that we were abandoned by a system that values us only as ammunition, then I have to accept that I wasted 37 years serving a fiction. That's too much cognitive dissonance. Easier to drink and maintain the lie." "Do you think the Emperor knows we're here?" I asked. "Do you think he cares?" Dominicus laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "The Emperor is a corpse on a throne sustained by the sacrifice of 10,000 psychers daily. He's been dead for 10,000 years. What remains is just power, will. The psychic aggregate of humanity's faith made manifest. Does it know we're here? Maybe. Does it care? No. Because caring requires consciousness, and whatever the Emperor is now, he's not conscious in any way we'd recognize." "That's heresy," I observed. "Everything's heresy if you look at it closely enough," he replied. "The Imperium runs on lies, Marcus. Comfortable lies that make the grinding horror tolerable. We tell soldiers their service matters. We tell workers their labor builds something glorious. We tell everyone the Emperor protects them. And it's all propaganda designed to keep people compliant while the machine consumes them." "If you believe that," I said, "why are you still wearing the vestments? Why maintain the fiction?" "Because the alternative is admitting I wasted my life serving a lie," he replied simply. "And that admission is more painful than continuing to pretend. So I drink. I perform the rituals. I tell people the Emperor values them. And we all pretend it means something." He offered me the bottle. I took it, drinking liquid that burned my throat and offered temporary oblivion from the knowledge that we were all trapped in slow extinction. "We killed Commissar Yevgeny for maintaining the regulations," I said. "But at least he believed in something. Died for principles, even if those principles were wrong. What do we believe in, Father? What are we dying for?" "Survival," Dominicus said. "We believe in survival, not because survival has inherent value, but because the alternative is admitting defeat. We're too stubborn to die, too broken to thrive, so we persist in this middle state, dying slowly enough that we can pretend we're living." "That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard," I observed. "Yes," he agreed, "but it's honest. And honesty is all I have left." The next crisis came in year 4, month 7. A disease outbreak, something native to Hadrian's Rest that our immune systems couldn't properly handle. It started with fever and respiratory distress, progressed to organ failure, and killed approximately 30% of those infected. We lost 643 people in 3 months, 643 people we couldn't afford to lose, gone because we didn't have proper medical facilities, couldn't produce advanced pharmaceuticals, and lacked the infrastructure to contain outbreaks effectively. The mass graves in the forgotten field expanded rapidly. Father Dominicus performed so many funerals he stopped using individual names, just blessing groups of corpses with the same mechanical prayers. "The Emperor recognizes your sacrifice," he'd say over dozens of bodies simultaneously. "Your service is recorded. Lomaskan and your souls ascend. The Emperor protects." No one corrected him anymore. We all knew the Emperor wasn't protecting anyone, but the rituals were comforting, and comfort was in short supply. I lost Private Kellis to the outbreak. She'd survived the Orc campaign, the starvation, the factional war, 4 years of slow decline, only to die coughing blood in a makeshift medical tent while chirurgeons who'd run out of proper medicine tried desperately to save her with improvised treatments. "Tell me it mattered," she gasped during her final hours, her hand gripping mine with the strength of desperation. "Tell me that fighting, surviving, killing Yevgeny. Tell me it was worth something." I wanted to lie, wanted to give her comfort in her final moments, but I'd spent 4 years learning that lies didn't actually help. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if it mattered. We survived longer than we would have under loyalist command. We built something that resembles civilization. But we're still dying, just slower. I can't tell you if the extra years justified the price we paid." "That's a terrible answer," she said and laughed weakly. The sound turned into coughing that brought up blood. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't have a better one." "No," she agreed. "No one does. That's the real horror, isn't it? Not the dying, but dying without knowing if it meant anything." She died 6 hours later, and I added her name to the growing list of people I'd failed to save. The census after the outbreak was devastating. 3,630 souls remaining, down from 4,273 before the disease hit. We'd lost over 600 people, nearly 15% of our population, in 3 months. "At this rate," Cross said during the emergency leadership meeting, "we have maybe 30 years before terminal decline. 40 if we're very lucky. The outbreak accelerated our extinction timeline by decades." "Can we recover?" someone asked. "Unknown," Cross replied. "If we avoid major disasters for the next few years, if we can increase birth rates somehow, if we implement stricter quarantine protocols, maybe we extend the timeline back to 50 years. But we're fighting mathematics now. And mathematics doesn't care about effort or determination." "Then what's the point?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "If we're inevitably extinct, if all our efforts just delay the inevitable by a few decades, why keep fighting? Why not just give up? Make it quick instead of dragging it out?" The room went silent. Because we'd all thought it, but no one had said it aloud until now. "Because quick is cowardice," Cross said finally. "We survived 4 years of hell. Thousands died to get us this far. Giving up now means admitting their deaths were pointless. At least if we keep going, if we maintain civilization as long as possible, we honor their sacrifice by making it last." "Is that enough?" I challenged. "Honoring the dead by continuing to survive in a situation they died trying to escape?" "It has to be," Cross replied, "because the alternative is lying down and waiting for extinction. And I'm not ready to do that yet, are you?" I thought about Kellis, about Yevgeny, about the thousands buried in the forgotten field. Thought about what they'd want from us, the survivors. "No," I finally said, "I'm not ready to give up, but I'm also not sure surviving is victory anymore. It's just persistence. And I don't know if persistence has value in itself or if we're just too stubborn to accept defeat." "Then we're stubborn," Cross said. "We persist. We honor the dead by outliving them as long as possible. And we hope that somehow, someday, something changes. That's all we have." It wasn't inspiring, but it was honest. And honesty was the only currency that still held value on Hadrian's Rest. That night I visited the forgotten field. Thousands of graves now, marked with crude markers made from salvaged materials. Each one representing someone who'd served the Imperium, believed in the cause, followed orders, and died forgotten on a world that didn't appear on Imperial star charts anymore. I found Commissar Yevgeny's grave, marked with his rank and name. No heroic epitaph because we'd stopped pretending deaths were heroic. "You were right," I said to the marker. "About the regulations, about maintaining order, about believing in something beyond survival. I didn't understand it when I killed you, but I'm starting to." The marker didn't respond. Dead men rarely did. "We're dying," I continued. "Slowly, inevitably, mathematically. All the pragmatism in the galaxy won't save us. We killed you to buy time, and the time we bought is just extending our extinction by decades. You died believing in the Imperium. We'll die believing in nothing except our own stubbornness. I'm not sure which is better." I stood there among the graves, surrounded by the forgotten dead of a forgotten war, on a forgotten world where abandoned soldiers waited for rescue that would never come. And I finally understood what abandonment actually meant. It didn't mean the Imperium forgot we existed. They knew. Somewhere in some vast archive, our records were filed, our deaths noted, our sacrifice recorded in ledgers no one would ever read. Abandonment meant they knew and didn't care, that we'd been calculated as acceptable losses, that the resources required to rescue us exceeded our value to the Imperium, that we'd served our purpose, and now we could simply cease to exist at our convenience. "The Emperor protects," I said to the graves, to Yevgeny's marker, to the thousands who died waiting. The wind carried my words away into Hadrian's Rest's toxic atmosphere where they meant nothing to anyone. Just like our service. Just like our sacrifice, just like us. The ship arrived in year 5, month 3. Not Imperial. We'd long since stopped hoping for Imperial rescue, but a smuggler vessel broadcasting non-standard identification codes and requesting permission to land at our primary settlement. They were here to trade, as smugglers had been doing irregularly for the past 3 years. Adamantium for medicine, technology, and supplies the Imperium no longer provided. Routine. Expected, unremarkable. Except this time the smuggler captain had a different kind of offer. Her name was Captain Vega Saris, and she commanded a modified cargo hauler called the Prodigal Fortune. She was maybe 45 standard years with augmetic enhancements that suggested a past in either the Navy or criminal enterprises, possibly both. Her crew was the usual collection of deserters, criminals, and people running from something they wouldn't discuss. "Your adamantium is high quality," she said during the trade negotiations, sitting across from Lieutenant Cross and me in what passed for our administrative building. "Better than most independent mining operations produce. You've got skilled people working those excavations." "Former guard engineers," Cross replied. "They know their trade. We provide quality product. You provide fair compensation. That's been our arrangement for 2 years." "About that arrangement," Vega said, her tone shifting, "I have a proposition. Something beyond simple trade." "We're listening," I said cautiously. Smugglers didn't make propositions out of generosity. If she was offering something beyond standard commerce, she wanted something substantial in return. Vega pulled out a data slate, displaying what looked like shipping manifests and population data. "I've been observing Hadrian's Rest for 6 visits now, watching your population decline, noting the graves you keep digging, running the mathematics. You're dying here. Slowly but inevitably. 30 years, maybe 40 before you hit terminal population collapse." "We're aware," Cross said, his augmetic eye focusing on her with mechanical intensity. "If you're here to mock our situation, you can leave now." "I'm here to offer a solution," Vega replied. Evacuation. I can transport approximately 400 people per trip. At current capacity, I could extract your entire population in... She checked her calculations. 9 trips, maybe 10, accounting for cargo space limitations. Total operation time, approximately 18 months, assuming I can maintain my current trade routes without attracting Imperial attention. The silence that followed was profound. You're offering to evacuate us, I said slowly, making sure I understood. Remove 3,600 former Imperial guardsmen from an abandoned world and transport us. Where? Multiple destinations, Vega replied. I have contacts in the fringe territories, human settlements outside Imperial control. Some are former colonies that declared independence. Others are refugee communities. A few are criminal enterprises that need skilled workers. Not paradise, but functional societies where you could integrate, reproduce, actually build futures instead of just managing decline. And what do you want in return? Cross asked bluntly. Smugglers don't offer multi-year evacuation operations out of charity. Vega smiled. Smart. I like that. What I want is payment. Specifically, I want Hadrian's Rest's adamantium deposits. All of them. Complete mining rights transferred to me personally, enforceable through whatever authority structure you've established here. You get evacuation. I get an entire planet's worth of valuable ore that I can mine and sell for the next 50 years. The adamantium belongs to the Imperium, Cross said automatically, though the words sounded hollow even to him. The Imperium abandoned you 4 years ago, Vega countered. They don't care about Hadrian's Rest. They've written off this world as a strategic loss. The adamantium is effectively ownerless. You can die here clinging to the fiction that you're protecting Imperial property. Or you can trade that property for actual survival. Your choice. The Leadership Council debated for 3 days. The arguments were predictable. Some advocated acceptance. This was our only chance at survival, a genuine escape from inevitable extinction. Others argued it was treason, trading Imperial resources to criminals, abandoning our posts, definitively severing whatever remaining connection we had to the Imperium. We're already traitors, I pointed out during the debate. We killed a commissar. We overthrew Imperial authority. We've been trading with smugglers for 3 years. If the Imperium returns, they'll execute us regardless of whether we evacuated or stayed. At least evacuation gives us a chance at actual futures. But where do we go? Someone challenged. Vega's talking about fringe settlements, criminal havens, places outside Imperial control. We'd be refugees, assuming any of those settlements even accept former guardsmen. We could end up scattered across a dozen worlds, our community destroyed, everything we've built here lost. Everything we've built here is temporary, Cross replied. We're dying. The outbreak proved that. One major disaster and we accelerate toward extinction. Vega's offering escape from a grave we've been digging for 4 years. Yes, there are risks. Yes, we'd be leaving Imperial space. But the alternative is certain death. There's honor in dying as Imperial guardsmen, someone argued. Our service meant something, even in abandonment. Fleeing to criminal settlements means admitting we were never actually loyal, that our oaths were conditional on the Imperium caring about us. Our oaths were conditional, I shot back. We swore to serve the Imperium faithfully. The Imperium broke that contract when they abandoned us. We don't owe loyalty to an empire that forgot we existed. The debate continued for hours, but ultimately the mathematics won. We were dying here. Evacuation offered survival. Everything else was sentiment that couldn't compete with the reality of inevitable extinction. The vote passed. 267 in favor of evacuation, 43 against, 17 abstaining. We would accept Captain Vega's offer, trade Hadrian's Rest's adamantium for escape from our slowly tightening grave. The first evacuation flight departed 6 weeks later. Captain Vega's requirements were strict: 400 people maximum per trip, limited personal belongings, no weapons beyond what she'd permit for self-defense, and absolute compliance with her crew's instructions during transit. Any deviation would result in immediate expulsion from the evacuation queue. "This is a smuggling operation, not a military transport," she'd explained. "We're evading Imperial patrols, navigating through pirate territories, and dropping refugees at settlements that technically don't want their locations known. The moment this operation attracts attention, it ends. So everyone follows my rules or everyone stays here to die. Understood?" We understood. The selection process for the first flight was agonizing. We prioritized families with children, medical personnel, skilled workers we'd need to rebuild wherever we ended up. The 400 selected were the lucky ones, guaranteed escape from Hadrian's Rest's slow extinction. The rest of us would wait and hope Vega returned for the next trip. I watched the prodigal fortune lift off from our makeshift landing pad, carrying 400 former guardsmen toward uncertain futures in the fringe territories. "Think she'll actually come back?" I asked Cross as the ship disappeared into Hadrian's Rest's polluted atmosphere. "Unknown," he replied. "She has incentive. We've only transferred mining rights for one deposit. The rest are contingent on completing the evacuation, but pirates, patrol encounters, equipment failures, any number of things could prevent her return. We're gambling that she values the adamantium enough to make 9 more trips. And if she doesn't come back, then we lost 400 people who could have died here with the rest of us, and we're down to 3,200 souls with no escape plan. But that's not a worse position than we were in 6 weeks ago. At least 400 survived. That's something." He was right, but the admission was depressing. We'd reduced our survival calculations to hoping that a criminal smuggler valued our planet's resources enough to save us. Not because she cared about our lives, but because we represented profitable extraction opportunities. Just another form of exploitation, different from the Imperium's, but exploitation nonetheless. Captain Vega returned 78 days later. The relief was almost physical. She'd completed the first trip, dropped the refugees at what she described as a reasonably functional settlement in the Carolus sector, and returned for the second load. 400 more, she said during the brief landing. "Same rules, same priority criteria. We've got 8 more trips after this, assuming nothing goes wrong. Stay organized, stay compliant, and everyone gets off this rock." The second evacuation departed with 400 more souls. More families, more essential personnel, more people escaping toward uncertain futures that were at least better than certain death. We were down to 2,800. The pattern continued for 11 months. Vega made 6 trips total, extracting 2,400 people from Hadrian's Rest. Each departure felt like victory and loss simultaneously. Victory that more people survived, loss that our community was shrinking, that the settlement we'd built was being dismantled piece by piece. By year 5, month 11, only 1,400 of us remained. And then the Imperium returned. The Imperial Navy frigate translated into system on year 5, month 11, day 7. Not a rescue ship, not a supply vessel, not the salvation we'd stopped hoping for 4 years ago, but an investigation team responding to reports of irregular trading activity in a supposedly abandoned system. They found us immediately. Hard to hide a settlement of 1,400 people operating adamantium mines on a world that was supposed to be empty. "All personnel on Hadrian's Rest, this is Imperial Navy frigate Righteous Mandate," the Vox broadcast across all frequencies. "You are ordered to stand down and prepare for Imperial inspection." Unauthorized occupation of Imperial territory and illegal mining operations constitute multiple violations of Imperial law. Compliance is mandatory. Non-compliance will be met with force. We had maybe 6 hours before they sent landing parties. 6 hours to decide what to do about the fact that the Imperium had finally remembered we existed, but only because we'd become criminals in their eyes. The emergency leadership meeting was chaotic. "We surrender," one faction argued. "We're still Imperial guardsmen. We explained the situation, that we were abandoned, that we survived through necessary improvisation, that we're loyal citizens who deserve understanding rather than prosecution." "They'll execute us," another faction countered. "We killed a commissar. We traded with smugglers. We've been operating outside Imperial authority for 4 years. The Imperium doesn't forgive that level of deviation. They'll classify us as traitors and purge the entire settlement." "We fight," a third faction suggested. 1,400 former guard against 1 frigate. If we can damage them badly enough, they might retreat. We've survived this long. We can survive Imperial aggression too. "That's suicide," Cross said flatly. "A Navy frigate has orbital bombardment capabilities. They can reduce this settlement to slag from space without ever landing. Fighting guarantees our death." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "Surrender and face execution? Fight and face bombardment? There's no good option." "There's one option," Cross said slowly. "We call Captain Vega. Tell her to abort the operation. Take whoever she can fit on one final trip and run. At least some of us survive." "Vega's not due back for another 3 weeks," someone pointed out. "The Navy's here now." "Then we vox her," Cross replied. "Emergency transmission. She's still in the sector if she's maintaining her schedule. Maybe she can accelerate her return, extract a final group before the Navy locks down the system." "And the rest of us?" I asked. "The rest of us surrender," Cross said. "Face whatever justice the Imperium dispenses, but at least we ensure some survivors escape. That's better than everyone dying here." The vote was quick. We had no time for extended debate. The decision passed. Contact Vega. Attempt one final evacuation. Surrender the rest to Imperial authority. At least some of us would survive. That had to be enough. Captain Vega's response came 30 minutes later. "Received your emergency transmission. I'm 2 days out at maximum burn. Can arrive in 46 hours, but that's cutting it close to Imperial interdiction. I can take 400 maximum standard capacity limitations. You need to be ready for immediate departure. Anyone not on the landing pad when I arrive gets left behind. No exceptions. This is my final run. The Navy's presence makes further operations impossible. It's now or never. 46 hours, 400 slots, 1,400 people. The mathematics were cruel but simple. 1 in 3 would escape. 2 in 3 would surrender to Imperial justice. The selection process for the final evacuation was the hardest thing we'd ever done. We prioritized children and their parents. That was non-negotiable. Then medical personnel and skilled workers who'd be most useful for rebuilding. Then anyone who'd been critical to our survival over the past 4 years. I made the list. Lieutenant Cross made the list. Father Dominicus refused his slot, giving it to a young engineer with technical skills we'd need. "I'm old," Dominicus said when I tried to argue. "I'm drunk most days. And I stopped believing years ago. Give the slot to someone who has a future worth saving. I'll face Imperial justice with whatever's left of my dignity." By the time we'd finished selection, we had the 400, the lucky ones who'd escape. The rest, approximately 1,000 people, would remain behind to face the Imperium's judgment. "I should stay," I told Cross during the final preparation. "You lead the survivors. You're better at this than I am." "You're staying because you feel guilty about surviving," Cross replied. "That's not leadership. That's self-flagellation. You have skills the survivors need. You have knowledge about what we've built here. You're coming. That's an order. You can't order me, I pointed out. We're not Imperial Guard anymore. We haven't been for years. Then I'm asking, he said, as a friend, as someone who's fought beside you for 5 years, don't waste your survival on guilt. Get on that ship. Help whoever we save build something better than what we're leaving behind. Captain Vega's ship arrived 44 hours after her transmission. The Imperial Navy frigate was still in orbit, conducting surveillance and preparing landing parties. We had maybe 2 hours before they'd begin their inspection. 2 hours to load 400 people and escape before the Imperium locked down the system. Move! 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 Vega's crew screamed as we boarded, processing refugees with ruthless efficiency. No time for goodbyes, no time for sentiment. Just bodies being loaded into cargo holds like freight. I was among the last to board. I looked back at Hadrian's Rest one final time, at the settlement we'd built from nothing, at the graves in the forgotten field, at the 1,000 people remaining behind to face imperial justice. Father Dominicus stood at the front of those remaining. He raised his hand in blessing, a gesture that probably meant nothing from a priest who'd stopped believing, but which felt significant anyway. "The Emperor protects," he mouthed, though no sound carried across the distance. I nodded, acknowledging the lie we both knew it was, and boarded the Prodigal Fortune. The ship's engines screamed as we lifted off, pushing toward orbit at velocities that made my enhanced guard physiology struggle. "Imperial frigate is hailing us," Vega's pilot reported. "They're ordering us to halt for inspection." "Ignore them," Vega commanded. "Plot jump coordinates for the Tertius vector. We're translating to warp the moment we clear the gravity well." "They're powering weapons," the pilot warned. "Then we better be fast." The Prodigal Fortune screamed toward the translation point, racing against Imperial lance batteries that could reduce us to vapor. Through the viewport, I could see the frigate adjusting its position, weapon systems tracking our trajectory. "They're firing!" someone shouted. A lance beam cut through space where we'd been seconds before, the Prodigal Fortune's evasive maneuvers barely sufficient to avoid destruction. 30 seconds to translation," the pilot announced. The frigate fired again, and again. Each shot closer than the last. 10 seconds. I gripped my restraints, knowing that if we didn't make translation, 400 refugees would die and Captain Vega's year-long operation would end in failure. 5 seconds. The frigate's next shot was perfect. Dead center trajectory, no way to evade. "Translating!" Reality tore, and we fell through the wound into the warp. Behind us, the lance beam passed harmlessly through the space where we'd been, striking nothing but void. We'd escaped. 400 survivors fleeing into the Immaterium, running from an Imperium that had abandoned us and then tried to execute us when we survived their abandonment. "We made it," someone said, the words carrying disbelief. 400 of us made it, I corrected. The rest are still there, waiting for Imperial justice. Through the Prodigal Fortune's sensors tuned to observe real space from the warp's edge, we watched what happened next. The Imperial Navy frigate achieved orbit over Hadrian's Rest. They transmitted demands for surrender. The remaining guard, 1,000 souls who'd been left behind, complied, laying down what few weapons they had, assembling in the central plaza for processing. The Imperium didn't accept their surrender. Instead, the frigate opened fire with orbital bombardment. Lance beams and macro cannons reducing the settlement to molten slag, systematically destroying every structure, every resource, every sign that humans had survived here for 5 years after abandonment. It took 47 minutes to sterilize the settlement completely. 1,000 people, former Imperial guardsmen who'd served loyally, fought victoriously, and survived abandonment through sheer determination, were incinerated from orbit without trial, without mercy, without even the dignity of being recorded as anything except unauthorized colonial presence eliminated per standard protocol. They killed them all, someone whispered, watching the display. They surrendered, and the Imperium killed them anyway. Of course they did, Cross said, his voice hollow. We were evidence, proof that the Imperium abandons its own soldiers, proof that the Guard is expendable, proof that loyalty means nothing when you're no longer useful. The Imperium couldn't allow that evidence to exist. So they erased it. The prodigal fortune emerged from the warp 3 weeks later in a system that didn't appear on any Imperial star charts I'd ever seen. Captain Vega called it the Tertius Vector, a cluster of 17 habitable worlds in the eastern fringe, all technically outside Imperial control, governed by a loose confederation of independent colonies that had declared sovereignty approximately 200 years ago during a period when the Imperium was too distracted by larger conflicts to suppress them. Think of it as the galaxy's margin, Vega explained during the approach to our destination. A world the locals called Providence. Places the Imperium knows exist but doesn't care enough about to reconquer. Too far from strategic resources, too expensive to pacify, too insignificant to matter. So they ignore us, we ignore them, and everyone pretends the arrangement is temporary. And the people here? I asked. Will they accept 400 refugees? Former Imperial guardsmen fleeing from the very Imperium they once served? Providence has accepted refugees for 2 centuries, Vega replied. They don't particularly care where you're from or what you're running from. If you work, contribute to the community, and don't cause problems, you can stay. It's not paradise, nowhere in this galaxy is, but it's functional, which is more than most places can claim. Through the viewport, I watched Providence grow larger. The planet looked almost painfully normal. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. No pollution hazes, no orbital defense platforms, no signs of the industrial devastation that characterized most Imperial worlds. It looked like what I imagined Hadrian's Rest might have been before the orcs and the Imperium had ground it into a toxic wasteland. It's beautiful, someone whispered behind me. Private Kellis's sister, one of the families we'd prioritized for evacuation. She'd lost her sibling to the outbreak, survived 5 years of hell, and now stood transfixed by the sight of a world that looked like it might actually support human life. It's temporary, Cross said quietly beside me, his augmetic eye clicking as it processed data. Everywhere's temporary. The Imperium could come here tomorrow, decide they want these worlds back, and we'd be fighting another war. Or the Tyranids could arrive, or chaos could corrupt the system. Nothing's permanent in this galaxy. Does it matter? I asked. We survived abandonment, orbital bombardment, and escape through the warp. Maybe temporary is enough. Maybe we stop trying to build something permanent and just exist for however long we get. That's a depressing philosophy, Cross observed. It's an honest one, I countered. We spent 5 years on Hadrian's Rest trying to build something sustainable. We failed. Maybe it's time to accept that sustainability is a lie and we should focus on surviving day by day instead of planning for futures we'll never see. You've gotten cynical, Cross said. I've gotten realistic, I corrected. There's a difference. The landing on Providence was surreal in its mundanity. No military inspection, no bureaucratic processing, no Imperial officials demanding papers and authorization. Just a landing coordinator directing us to a refugee processing center in the capital city. A place called New Harmony that looked like someone had tried to build an Imperial hive city but given up halfway through and settled for something more human-scaled instead. The processing was efficient, but not cruel. Medical checks for contagious diseases, basic skill assessments to determine where we might be useful, and assignment to temporary housing while we integrated into Providence's society. "You're all former military?" the intake officer asked when our group came through. He was maybe 50, with the relaxed competence of someone who'd processed thousands of refugees and developed streamlined methods. "That's actually useful. We've got border security issues, pirates mostly, but occasionally orc raiders who wander this far from their territories. Former guard can transition to militia service pretty easily." "We didn't come here to keep fighting," I said. "We came here to stop being soldiers." "Everyone says that," the officer replied, not unkindly. "Then they discover that being soldiers is all they know how to do. You'll adapt, most do. The ones who can't, well, we've got support services, counseling, medical care, community integration programs. Not perfect, but better than most places." He processed us through with practiced efficiency, assigned us to temporary housing blocks, and sent us on our way with informational packets about Providence's laws, customs, and opportunities. Just like that, we'd gone from Imperial guardsmen to refugees to potential citizens of an independent world. The transition felt both too easy and impossibly difficult. The temporary housing was a multi-story structure that had probably been intended as worker dormitories before being repurposed for refugees. Not luxurious, each unit was maybe 6 meters by 4 with basic amenities and shared facilities, but clean, safe, and most importantly, ours, without condition. No one was demanding labor in exchange for shelter. No one was calculating our utility. No one was threatening execution if we didn't meet quotas or follow regulations. We were just here, allowed to exist, given time and space to figure out what came next. It was disorienting. "I don't know what to do," Corporal Then said during our first group meeting in the housing complex. He'd been one of our best soldiers on Hadrian's Rest, reliable and competent under pressure. Now he looked lost. "For 5 years I had purpose, survive, maintain order, keep people alive. Now we're here and there's no mission, no objective. I'm supposed to just live? I don't know how to do that anymore." "None of us do," Cross replied. He'd organized the meeting, about 60 former guard from our unit gathering to process the transition together. "We've been soldiers since recruitment. The guard was our identity. Now we're civilians and we need to learn what that means." "I'm not sure I can be a civilian," someone else admitted. "Every time I hear a loud noise, I reach for a weapon that isn't there. I wake up expecting morning drills. I keep waiting for someone to give me orders. How do you stop being what you've been your entire adult life?" "Badly," I said, and saw recognition in the faces around me. "You stop being a soldier badly, awkwardly, with constant reminders of what you used to be. But you do it anyway because the alternative is remaining a soldier with no army, no mission, no war. And that's just slow-motion suicide. So we fumble through," Cross said. "We find work, build relationships, create routines that aren't military. We help each other adapt, support those who struggle, and accept that we'll never fully stop being soldiers. But maybe we can become soldiers who do other things. People who have military training but aren't defined by it." "That's optimistic," Then observed. "It's aspirational," Cross corrected. "Probably unrealistic. But we need goals, even unrealistic ones. Otherwise, we're just refugees waiting to die." I found work 6 weeks after arrival. Nothing glamorous, construction labor to helping build new housing for the constant influx of refugees from Imperial space. The work was physically demanding but straightforward. Lift materials, follow instructions, build something that would last longer than you would. The crew I joined was a mix of backgrounds: former Imperial citizens, pirates who'd retired from raiding, colonists from failed settlements, and a few people whose origins they wouldn't discuss. They didn't care that I'd been guard. Didn't ask about Hadrian's Rest or why 400 of us had arrived together. They just cared that I could work. "You're overqualified for this," my supervisor said after the first week. His name was Gregor, and he'd been a Mechanicus adept before deserting 60 years ago. Enhanced physiology, guard training, leadership experience. You could be doing security work, making 3 times what construction pays. "I spent 5 years in security work," I replied, "protecting a settlement that eventually died anyway. I'm done with security. I just want to build something and not have to shoot anyone while doing it." "Fair enough," Gregor said. "We all come here running from something. You run from violence, I ran from the Omnissiah's demands for perfection. As long as you show up and do the work, your past is your own." It was the most freedom I'd experienced in my entire life. The ability to work without someone calculating my utility, without regulations dictating my every action, without the constant awareness that I was ammunition to be spent. I was just a worker, building houses, earning credits, existing without purpose beyond the immediate. It should have been liberating. Instead, it felt empty. The nightmares started 3 months after arrival. Not combat nightmares, I'd had those for years, learned to manage them through sheer exposure. These were different, worse. I'd dream about Hadrian's Rest, about the 1,000 people we'd left behind, about watching orbital bombardment reduce them to ash while we fled into the warp, about Father Dominicus raising his hand in blessing moments before the lance beams incinerated him, about making the selection list, deciding who deserved survival, who would be abandoned, playing God with 400 slots and 1,400 lives. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, the certainty that I'd murdered 1,000 people through the crime of survival crushing my chest. Survivor's guilt, the Providence counselor diagnosed during my 3rd session. Her name was Dr. Yene, and she specialized in treating refugees who'd fled traumatic situations. You survived when others didn't. Your mind is trying to process the unfairness by assigning blame, specifically blaming yourself for making the choices that led to your survival. "I made the selection list," I said. "I chose who lived and who died. That's not guilt. That's responsibility. I killed those people as surely as the Imperial Navy did." "You didn't fire the lance cannons," Dr. Yene corrected gently. "The Imperium chose to execute surrendering soldiers rather than processing them as refugees. That decision was theirs, not yours. You made the best choices available in an impossible situation. That's not murder, that's survival." "Is there a difference?" I asked. "When the outcome is the same? 1,000 people died because I selected 400 for evacuation. If I'd made different choices, different people would have died. Either way, I'm responsible for deaths." "Then every leader in every crisis situation is a murderer," Dr. Yen said. "Every commander who allocates limited resources, every doctor who performs triage, every ship captain who fills lifeboats knowing some passengers will be left behind. That's not murder. That's the burden of responsibility in situations where perfect outcomes don't exist." "The burden doesn't feel like responsibility," I said. "It feels like I'm drowning, and every person I saved is a weight pulling me deeper. I should be grateful we survived. Instead, I'm just empty, hollow, like I left whatever made me human on Hadrian's Rest with the people who died." Dr. Yene was quiet for a moment. "That's not uncommon among survivors," she finally said. "The feeling that you don't deserve to have survived, that something essential was lost in the process. It's your mind trying to process trauma through self-punishment." "Does it get better?" I asked. "It gets manageable," she replied carefully. "Not better. You don't forget the dead. Don't stop feeling responsible. But you develop tools to carry the weight without collapsing under it. That's the best I can offer. Management, not cure. Management, I repeated. Just like everything else in this galaxy, we don't fix problems, we manage them until they kill us. Yes, Dr. Yene agreed. That's a depressingly accurate summary of the human condition. Welcome to civilian life, Sergeant Thorne. It's just as broken as military service, but at least no one's shooting at you. Lieutenant Cross found purpose faster than most of us. He joined Providence's militia, the volunteer security force that protected the colony from pirates and raiders. His guard training and leadership experience made him immediately valuable, and within 4 months he'd been promoted to militia captain, commanding a company of former soldiers from various backgrounds. "You should join," he said during one of our irregular meetings at a drinking establishment that served locally produced alcohol. "Your skills are wasting in construction. The militia needs experienced NCOs. You'd have command of your own platoon within weeks." "I told you," I replied, "I'm done being a soldier, done making life and death decisions, done being responsible for other people's survival. Construction is simple. I show up, do the work, go home. No one dies if I make a mistake." "No one lives particularly well either," Cross observed. "You're going through the motions, Marcus. Working, sleeping, existing, but not actually living. I've seen it in soldiers before. They survive the war but can't figure out what to do with survival. So they just fade, become ghosts occupying bodies that forgot how to be alive. Maybe that's all I am now," I said, "a ghost. The person I was died on Hadrian's Rest with everyone we abandoned. What's left is just biological processes and guilt." "That's the depression talking," Cross said bluntly. "And I recognize it because I felt the same way after we escaped. Watching that bombardment, knowing we'd survived while 1,000 others died, it hollowed me out. Made everything feel pointless." "How'd you get past it?" I asked. "I didn't," he admitted. "I just found new purpose. The militia needs what I can provide. Protecting Providence gives me something beyond myself to focus on. It's not healing. The guilt's still there, the nightmares still happen. But it's direction. And direction is better than drifting. I'm not ready to be responsible for soldiers again," I said. "Then don't join the militia," Cross replied. "But find something. Work that matters to you. Relationships that give you reason to keep existing. Anything that makes you more than just a collection of survivors' guilt and construction labor. Because what you're doing now, it's not living, it's just waiting to die slowly." He wasn't wrong, but acknowledging he was right didn't give me the energy to change. The change came 6 months after arrival, and it came from an unexpected source. A former guardsman from our evacuation, Private Chen, who'd served in a different company during the Hadrian's Rest deployment, found me at the construction site. "Sergeant Thorne," he said, his expression carrying urgency. "We need to talk about the ones we left behind." "They're dead," I replied flatly. "We watched the Imperium kill them. There's nothing to talk about." "Not all of them," Chen insisted. "I've been monitoring Imperial communications, old Navy training, signals intelligence. 3 days ago, I intercepted a transmission from an inquisitorial vessel. They were discussing recovered specimens from the Hadrian's Rest sterilization operation. Not bodies, specimens, plural. Meaning some survived the bombardment. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not possible. We watched them die. The bombardment was total." "The bombardment was thorough," Chen corrected. "But Hadrian's Rest had underground mining tunnels. Deep ones, reinforced against collapse. If some of our people took shelter there when they saw the frigate powering weapons, they might have survived. And if they survived, the Imperium would have captured them during post-bombardment sweep operations." "Captured them for what purpose?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "Interrogation," Chen said grimly. "The Imperium wants to know how we survived 5 years of abandonment. what methods we used, what resources we exploited, whether any of us made contact with Xenos or Chaos entities. Standard inquisitorial procedure for unauthorized colonial survivals. They're being held somewhere, probably in an inquisitorial facility, being questioned about everything we did. How many survived? I asked. The transmission didn't specify, but they referred to specimens plural, so at least 2, possibly more. Could be a handful, could be hundreds if enough people reached the deep tunnels in time. I looked at Cross, who'd arrived during the conversation, his augmetic eye processing the implications. If this is true, he said slowly, we have a decision to make. Leave them in inquisitorial custody where they're probably being tortured for information. Or attempt a rescue operation that would be suicidal and definitely make us permanent enemies of the Imperium. We already are enemies of the Imperium, I pointed out. They tried to kill us when we escaped, rescued us from abandonment just to execute us for surviving. What's one more crime on the list? The difference, Cross said, is that right now we're forgotten. The Imperium has bigger problems than tracking down 400 refugees in the fringe territories. But if we raid an inquisitorial facility, they'd hunt us forever. Never stop. Never forget. We'd be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. So we leave them, I said, and the words tasted like poison. We abandoned them once on Hadrian's Rest. Now we abandon them again in inquisitorial cells. Let them be tortured and probably executed while we live comfortable civilian lives in the fringe. That's the pragmatic choice, Cross agreed. The smart choice. The choice that maximizes our own survival at the cost of theirs. We've made that choice before, and it's killing me, I admitted. Every day I wake up carrying the weight of the people we left behind, the selection list, the bombardment. If there's a chance, any chance, to save some of them, don't we have to try? Even if it's stupid and suicidal and guarantees we'll be hunted forever? Cross was quiet for a long moment, his augmetic eye glowing in the afternoon light. Yes, he finally said. We have to try, because if we don't, we're just validating every cynical thing the Imperium taught us. That survival is the only value. That loyalty is conditional, that we're ammunition to be spent or preserved based on utility. If we leave them in inquisitorial custody, we become exactly what the Imperium made us, weapons that only care about our own preservation. So we mount a rescue operation, I said. 400 former guardsmen, no ships, no resources, no intelligence about the facility's location, attempting to raid an inquisitorial installation. That's insane. Yes, Cross agreed. But it's the right kind of insane. The kind that says we're still human, still capable of irrational loyalty, still willing to risk everything for brothers and sisters we left behind. He looked at me with something that might have been hope, or might have been resignation to necessary sacrifice. You wanted purpose, Marcus. Something beyond construction labor and survivor's guilt. Well, here it is. The most dangerous, stupidest, most likely to fail mission imaginable. You in? I thought about Father Dominicus, about the 1,000 people we'd watched die from orbit, about the weight I'd been carrying since the day we escaped. About the chance, probably futile, definitely suicidal, to save some of them. I'm in, I said. Let's go do something monumentally stupid and probably fatal. It'll be just like the Guard, except this time we're doing it by choice. Planning a raid on an inquisitorial facility with no ships, no heavy weapons, and no intelligence about the target location should have been impossible. Fortunately, we had 400 former Imperial guardsmen who'd survived 5 years of abandonment through a combination of desperation, improvisation, and sheer refusal to die quietly. Impossible was just another word for difficult but achievable if you're willing to accept catastrophic casualties. We'd gotten very good at accepting catastrophic casualties. The planning took 3 months. Chen continued monitoring Imperial communications, tracking the inquisitorial vessel's movements. It was a small ship, a Cobra-class destroyer designated Righteous Inquiry, assigned to investigate irregular colonial developments in the Eastern Fringe. They'd been to Hadrian's Rest, collected survivors, and were now conducting interrogations while pursuing other investigations. "They're not heading back to Imperial space," Chen reported during our first major planning meeting. We'd assembled about 80 former guard who were willing to participate. Not everyone from our original 400 wanted to risk their new lives for people they'd accepted as dead. They're moving through the fringe territories, investigating other abandoned worlds, like they're documenting patterns of survival outside Imperial control. "So they're building a database," Cross said, "recording how humans survive when the Imperium abandons them. Probably to improve future abandonment protocols. Make sure next time no one survives to tell the story." "That's cynical," someone observed. "That's the Imperium," I corrected. "They don't like loose ends. We're loose ends. The Hadrian's Rest survivors are loose ends. The Inquisition is cleaning up evidence that Imperial abandonment produces survivors." "How many survivors did they recover?" Cross asked Chen. "The transmissions mentioned 43 specimens in one communication," Chen replied. "I can't confirm if that's total or just one batch, but it's at least 43. 43 people who survived the bombardment, probably by reaching the deep mining tunnels like we theorized. 43. Not the 1,000 we'd abandoned, but not nothing either. 43 people who'd watched 400 of their comrades escape while they'd been left behind to face Imperial justice, which had turned out to be orbital bombardment followed by capture and interrogation. 43 people we can save," I said. "If we're fast, lucky, and willing to accept that most of us probably won't survive the attempt." "Standard guard odds," someone joked, though the humor was hollow. The biggest obstacle was transportation. We didn't have a ship. We didn't have access to ships. And Providence's government wasn't going to loan us military vessels for an unauthorized raid on Imperial assets. "We need Captain Vega," Cross said. "She evacuated us, she has the prodigal fortune, and she owes us. We gave her mining rights to an entire planet's worth of adamantium. That has to be worth one more operation." "Vega's a smuggler," I pointed out. "She doesn't owe us anything except what was in the contract, and raiding an inquisitorial vessel definitely wasn't in the contract. Why would she risk her ship and crew for people she's never met?" "Because we'll pay her," Cross said simply. "We've been working for 6 months. We have savings. 80 of us pool our resources. We can offer significant compensation. And if that's not enough, we offer something else. Combat-trained crew. Her smuggling operation would benefit from having experienced guard providing security. That's worth something to a captain who operates in dangerous territories." It was a long shot, but long shots were all we had. Captain Vega agreed to the meeting, though her expression suggested she already regretted it. "Let me understand this correctly," she said in the private room we'd rented for negotiations. "You want me to take my ship, my livelihood, my home, my entire economic future, and use it to raid an inquisitorial destroyer. A vessel crewed by the Imperium's most fanatical investigators, equipped with weapons that could vaporize the prodigal fortune in seconds, and operating under authority that makes them legally untouchable." "Yes," Cross said simply. "And in exchange you're offering what? Some credits you've saved from construction work? The services of 80 former guardsmen as security contractors? The warm feeling of having done something heroic?" "All three," I said. "Plus the knowledge that you'd be striking a blow against the Imperium that abandoned 6,000 soldiers and then tried to execute them for surviving." "You're a smuggler, Captain, You operate outside Imperial authority. You've built your entire career on taking from the system that takes from everyone else. This is your chance to take something big. This is my chance to get killed for someone else's vendetta, Vega corrected. I evacuated you because it was profitable. I'm not interested in suicide missions that serve only emotional closure. Find another ship. She stood to leave, and I played our final card. 43 people, I said. 43 survivors who watched their comrades escape, who survived orbital bombardment through sheer luck, who are currently being tortured in inquisitorial cells because they didn't die fast enough. You evacuated 400 of us. These 43 are the ones who didn't make it. Don't you want to finish the job? Vega paused at the door. You're appealing to my conscience, she said. I'm a smuggler, I don't have one. Everyone has a conscience, I replied. Some just bury it deeper than others. You could have dumped us anywhere, sold us to slavers, turned us over to the Imperium for reward money, dropped us on a dead world and kept the adamantium anyway. But you didn't. You brought us here to a relatively safe colony where we had a chance. That suggests conscience, whether you admit it or not. That suggests pragmatism, Vega corrected. Establishing reputation as a reliable evacuator opens future business opportunities. It's not conscience, it's long-term planning. Call it whatever you want, Cross said, but help us anyway. We need a ship. You have one. We need someone who can navigate dangerous territories and evade Imperial patrols. You do that professionally. This operation is impossible without you. Vega turned back to face us, her expression calculating. How much are you offering, total? All 80 contributors. 140,000 credits, Cross said, plus guaranteed security contracts for 2 years. We provide crew for dangerous routes, serve as armed guards for high-risk cargo runs, basically function as your private military unit. That's worth more than the credits alone. It's also worth nothing if we're dead, Vega pointed out. Raiding an inquisitorial vessel is suicide. We're not raiding the vessel, I said. We're raiding wherever they're keeping the prisoners. Chen's intelligence suggests they're not holding them on the destroyer, probably transferred to a facility somewhere. We track that facility, extract the prisoners, and disappear before the Inquisition can respond. In and out, minimal engagement. There's no such thing as minimal engagement with the Inquisition, Vega said. They don't forget, don't forgive, don't stop hunting. If we do this, we're permanently enemies of the Imperium's most dangerous organization. We're already permanently enemies, I said. The Imperium tried to execute us for surviving their abandonment. This doesn't make our situation worse. It just gives us the chance to save 43 people in the process. Vega was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. 200,000 credits, she finally said. Plus 3 years of security contracts. Plus I get salvage rights to any Imperial equipment we capture during the operation. And if this goes wrong, if we're captured or killed, everyone understands that I'm doing this purely for profit. I'm not a hero. I'm a mercenary. Those are my terms. Deal, Cross said immediately. We shook hands, sealing the agreement that would probably get us all killed. But at least we'd die trying to save the ones we'd left behind. That had to count for something. The Righteous Inquiry delivered its prisoners to a facility on a moon called Absolution's Gate 2 months later. Chen's signal intercepts had tracked their movements, identified the transfer, and located the facility. An inquisitorial interrogation complex built into Absolution's Gate's largest crater. The moon was otherwise uninhabited, chosen specifically for its isolation. No witnesses, no interference. Just the Inquisition and their prisoners conducting interrogations that would never appear in official records. The facility has approximately 200 personnel, Chen briefed during our final planning meeting aboard the Prodigal Fortune. Mostly servitors and interrogators with a small security detachment of maybe 40 armed guards. The Righteous Inquiry dropped the prisoners 3 weeks ago and departed. They're currently investigating another abandoned world 2 sectors away. So we're not facing the destroyer, just the facility itself. 200 personnel against 80 attackers, Cross calculated. Not ideal odds, but manageable if we have surprise and superior training. We've fought worse. The facility is hardened against assault, Chen continued. Reinforced walls, automated defenses, limited access points, standard inquisitorial security, but they're not expecting an attack. Who raids inquisitorial facilities? The galaxy's not that stupid. Except us, I said. We're exactly that stupid. So we use their assumptions against them. They're expecting interrogation subjects to remain compliant and no external threats to materialize. We provide the external threat they're not prepared for. What's the extraction plan? Someone asked. The prodigal fortune can't land on Absolution's gate. The facility's sensors would detect us immediately, Vega said. So we deploy via drop pods, hit the facility fast, breach the detention areas, extract the prisoners and exfiltrate to a pickup point 5 kilometers from the complex. The prodigal fortune retrieves us once we're clear of the facility's direct defense range. Drop pods, someone muttered. I hate drop pods. Everyone hates drop pods, Cross said. But they're fast and hard to intercept. We deploy, hit the ground, breach in under 60 seconds. Speed is our only advantage. The moment we lose surprise, we're fighting 200 defenders in a hardened facility. That's unwinnable, so we stay fast, stay violent, and get out before they organize proper resistance. Casualties? Someone asked. Estimate 30 to 40%, Cross said bluntly. 25 to 30 of us don't come back, but 50 survivors rescuing 43 prisoners is still net positive. And everyone here volunteered knowing the odds. If you're having second thoughts, speak now. No one spoke. We'd all accepted that we were probably going to die. The only question was whether we'd accomplish anything before that happened. The drop was exactly as terrible as expected. 8 pods, 10 soldiers each, falling from orbit toward Absolution's gate's surface like meteors. The pod's inertial dampeners struggled against gravitational forces that threatened to turn our enhanced bodies into paste. We'd all done combat drops before. It was standard guard training. But this was worse. No support, no backup, no extraction plan except survive and run 5 kilometers through hostile territory. Just 80 soldiers about to hit an inquisitorial facility like a very determined missile. 30 seconds to impact, the pod's automated systems announced. Prepare for hard landing. The Emperor protects. The Emperor doesn't protect anyone, I muttered, checking my weapons one final time. Vega had provided us with equipment from her smuggling contacts. Military grade but not Imperial issue, deniable if we were captured. Lasguns, grenades, breaching charges, and the desperate hope that surprise would be enough. 10 seconds. I saw Absolution's gate surface rushing up through the pod's viewport. Gray rock, no atmosphere worth mentioning, and one enormous crater containing the inquisitorial facility. A bunker complex that looked like it had been carved from the moon itself. 5 seconds. Impact imminent. The pod hit like the fist of an angry god. We exploded from the pods in perfect formation, muscle memory from guard training overriding the disorientation of hard landing. 8 pods, 80 soldiers, deployed in a perimeter around the facility's primary entrance. We had approximately 90 seconds before the facility's defenders could organize proper resistance. 90 seconds to breach, infiltrate, and disappear into the complex before we lost surprise. Breaching charges, Cross commanded. Set them and clear. Explosives were placed on the primary entrance, a massive blast door that would have taken hours to cut through normally. We had no hours. We had seconds. Charges set, clear the blast radius. We fell back, took cover behind rocks that had probably been undisturbed for millions of years, and watched the doors become temporary. The explosion was beautiful in its efficiency. The blast doors, designed to withstand sustained assault, simply ceased to exist as several kilos of high-grade explosives expressed their opinion about obstacles. The entrance was now a smoking hole leading into the facility's interior. "Move! Move! Move!" Cross roared, and we charged into an inquisitorial facility to rescue people we'd abandoned, to commit treason so complete that the Imperium would hunt us forever, just like old times. The interior of the facility was exactly as terrifying as expected. Inquisitorial architecture is designed to inspire dread. Long corridors lined with servo skulls recording everything, walls inscribed with prayers to the Emperor, and the constant sense that you're being watched by powers that consider your existence an affront to holy law. We killed the first defenders before they could sound an alarm. Guards responding to the explosion, expecting maybe a structural failure or equipment malfunction, found 80 combat veterans instead. They died professionally. Credit where it's due. Inquisitorial guards are well-trained, but surprised and outnumbered. "Chen, where are the detention cells?" Cross demanded. "Sub-level 3, Chen replied, consulting schematics he'd somehow acquired. I didn't ask how. Northeast quadrant, but we need to cross the main security station to reach them. That's where resistance will be heaviest." "Then we go through them," I said. "No time for subtlety. We breach, we extract, we run. Anyone who gets in our way dies. This is a fighting withdrawal from Minute 1. We advance through the facility like a blade through flesh. Methodical, violent, unstoppable, not through superior firepower, but through sheer, desperate momentum. Guards fell. Servitors were destroyed. The facility's automated defenses targeted us, but we'd planned for that. Chen had brought signal jammers that scrambled their targeting systems. For maybe 5 minutes, we owned the facility. Then the defenders regrouped, and the real fighting began. The security station was a kill box. A large chamber with only 2 entrances, filled with defenders who'd had time to prepare firing positions. We'd lost surprise, lost momentum, and now faced the reality of assaulting a hardened position with no heavy weapons and no time for clever tactics. "Suppressing fire!" Cross ordered, and 40 lasguns opened up simultaneously, painting the security station in strobing red. The defenders returned fire with disciplined accuracy that spoke of inquisitorial training. Las bolts and stubber rounds filled the air, and I watched 3 of our soldiers go down in the first exchange. 1 dead instantly, 2 wounded and dragged behind cover by their squad mates. "Grenades!" I shouted, and a dozen frag grenades arced through the entrance. The explosions were deafening in the enclosed space, shrapnel tearing through defenders who'd been too focused on returning fire to notice the incoming ordnance. We charged into the chaos while the survivors were still reeling. Close quarters combat, the kind the guard drilled into us until it became reflex. Las fire at point-blank range, combat knives finding gaps in armor, enhanced guard physiology against inquisitorial fanaticism, and we were more desperate. The security station fell in 4 minutes of brutal fighting. Cost 7 more casualties. 3 dead, 4 wounded badly enough to require immediate medical attention we didn't have time to provide. "Keep moving," Cross ordered, his voice hard. "We give them time to organize, we lose." "Chen, guide us to the detention cells. Everyone else, stay tight and keep moving." We found the Hadrian's Rest survivors on sub-level 3, northeast quadrant, exactly where Chen's intelligence had indicated. 43 people in cells designed for inquisitorial interrogation, reinforced walls, psychic dampeners, monitoring systems that recorded everything. They looked worse than we'd expected, malnourished, bearing signs of sustained interrogation, some showing injuries that medical care had stabilized but not healed. But alive. 43 people we'd abandoned, who'd survived bombardment and capture and 3 months of inquisitorial attention, looking up at us with expressions that mixed disbelief with desperate hope. "Sergeant Thorne," one of them said. I recognized him as Corporal Dane, one of the loyalists who'd survived the factional war. You're here. You came back." "We came back," I confirmed, already working on the cell locks with breaching tools. "We're extracting everyone. Can you move?" "We can move," Dane said, his voice strengthening. "Some are injured, but we can move. You actually came back for us." "Of course we did," Cross said, though his tone suggested he was as surprised as anyone that we'd made it this far. "Your guard. We don't leave people behind." "You left us once," someone else said, not accusatory, just stating fact. "And we regretted it every day since," I replied, getting the last cell open. "So we're fixing that mistake. Now move." We've got about 3 minutes before this facility's entire security force converges on our position, and our extraction window is closing fast. The rescued prisoners moved with the efficiency of soldiers despite their condition. Injured helping injured, the strongest carrying those who couldn't walk unassisted, organizing themselves into a mobile formation without being ordered. Guard training persisted even after 3 months of interrogation. We moved. The withdrawal was worse than the assault. The facility's defenders had reorganized, established choke points, and were systematically trying to seal us into sub-level 3. We fought through 2 ambushes, lost 6 more soldiers, and watched our ammunition reserves drop to critical levels. "We're not making the original extraction point," Vega's voice crackled through our vox. "Facilities activated perimeter defenses. You need to reach the secondary site, 8 kilometers northeast of your current position. The Prodigal Fortune is moving to intercept, but you need to get outside the defense perimeter. 8 kilometers, through hostile territory, carrying wounded, with defenders pursuing." Standard Imperial Guard operation, really. "Everyone able to run," Cross ordered. "Everyone wounded, you're being carried. No one gets left behind this time. We extract together or we die together. Move." We lost 14 more soldiers during the withdrawal. Rearguard actions against pursuing defenders. Soldiers who stayed behind to buy time for the main group to reach the extraction point. Wounded who couldn't keep pace and chose to make last stands rather than slow everyone down. By the time we reached the secondary extraction point, a flat stretch of lunar surface 8 kilometers from the facility, we were down to 49 soldiers from the original 80. 49 exhausted, ammunition-depleted, bleeding survivors watching the sky for a ship that might not come. "Vega," Cross transmitted, his voice hoarse. "We're at secondary extraction. Where's our ride?" 3 minutes out, Vega replied. "And you've got company. Facility-launched pursuit vehicles. They're 90 seconds behind you. This is going to be close." I looked back toward the facility and saw them. Armored transports carrying security forces moving fast across the lunar surface. They'd be on us in minutes. "Form defensive positions," I ordered, though we barely had enough ammunition for a sustained fight. "We hold until extraction. After that, we're committed. Either we're on the ship or we're dead. No middle ground." The 49 formed a perimeter. 43 rescued prisoners took what cover they could. We waited, watching pursuit vehicles close the distance, hoping a smuggler's ship would arrive before inquisitorial forces did. Standard guard odds. Terrible. But better than 0. The Prodigal Fortune screamed out of Absolution's gate's thin atmosphere 30 seconds before the pursuit vehicles reached our position. "Suppressing fire," Vega's voice came through the vox, and the ship's weapons lit up the lunar surface. Not trying to destroy the pursuit vehicles that would take weapons the prodigal fortune didn't have, but to create enough chaos to buy us time. The ship's boarding ramp deployed while still in motion, a maneuver that violated every safety protocol ever written, but which was also our only chance of survival. "Board! Now! Move!" Cross screamed and we ran, wounded being carried, rescued prisoners stumbling toward salvation, soldiers providing covering fire against defenders who were now close enough to engage. The boarding ramp was chaos, bodies piling aboard while las fire filled the air around us. I was the last to board, providing final covering fire while counting heads. 49 soldiers minus the ones who died in the final approach. 43 rescued prisoners. Some were missing, some had fallen during the withdrawal, but most were here. Most had survived. "Everyone's aboard!" I shouted into the Vox. "Get us out of here!" The Prodigal Fortune's engine screamed as it climbed toward orbit, inquisitorial pursuit vehicles firing upward with weapons that weren't designed for anti-ship combat. Their shots were close, but not close enough. We'd done it. Raided an inquisitorial facility. Rescued 43 prisoners. Survived to tell about it. At the cost of 31 soldiers who'd volunteered knowing they probably wouldn't come back. The celebration aboard the Prodigal Fortune was muted. Yes, we'd succeeded. Yes, we'd rescued people we'd thought were lost forever. Yes, we'd struck a blow against the Imperium that had abandoned and then tried to execute us. But 31 soldiers were dead. 31 people who'd survived 5 years on Hadrian's Rest, who'd built new lives on Providence, who'd volunteered to risk everything for brothers and sisters they'd left behind. They died so 43 others could live. The mathematics were brutal but simple. We'd traded 31 lives for 43. Net positive. Acceptable losses. The kind of calculation we'd been making since the day we'd been abandoned. Was it worth it? I asked Cross as we stood in the Prodigal Fortune's cargo hold surrounded by exhausted survivors. "Ask me in 10 years, he replied, echoing words from another lifetime. If the 43 we saved build lives worth living, if they thrive on Providence and prove that our sacrifice meant something, then maybe it was worth it. If they just die slowly of guilt and trauma like we've been doing, then we murdered 31 people for nothing." I looked at the rescued prisoners. Corporal Dane was reuniting with soldiers from his old unit. Others were receiving medical attention from the Prodigal Fortune's chirurgeon. Some were just sitting in silence, processing the fact that they'd been rescued when they'd accepted they would die in inquisitorial cells. "They deserve the chance," I said. "Whatever happens next, at least they have a chance. That's more than we gave them on Hadrian's Rest." "It's more than the Imperium gave any of us," Cross agreed. "We were all abandoned. Written off, forgotten. At least now some of us survived to remember. That counts for something." "Does it?" I asked. "It has to," he said. "Because if it doesn't, then everything we did, the factional war, the selection list, this raid, was meaningless violence. I need to believe it meant something, even if that belief is a lie." Captain Vega found me later, while I was helping treat wounded in the ship's medical bay. "That was the stupidest operation I've ever participated in," she said without preamble. "Raiding an inquisitorial facility with 80 soldiers and drop pods. I've seen guard suicide missions with better survival odds." "But it worked," I pointed out. "It worked because we got lucky," she corrected. "If the righteous inquiry had been in system, we'd all be dead. If the facility had maintained better perimeter security, we'd all be dead. If any one of a dozen variables had gone differently, we'd all be dead. Success doesn't validate stupidity, it just means the galaxy was too distracted to punish us this time." Will you transport the rescued prisoners to Providence? I asked. Already plotted the course, Vega replied. They're paying passengers now, same as you were during the original evacuation. Though I'm charging hazard rates because everyone aboard is now permanently on the Inquisition's target list. That's an ongoing liability I need to be compensated for. Fair, I admitted. What will you do now? The Imperium knows your ship helped raid their facility. They'll hunt you. They'll try, Vega said, but the prodigal fortune has been hunted before. We're very good at not being found. Besides, the Imperium has bigger problems than one smuggler who helped rescue abandoned guardsmen. They'll flag us as hostile, maintain surveillance, but active pursuit? That requires resources they can't spare. So we all just keep running, I said, forever, looking over our shoulders, waiting for the Imperium to remember we exist. Welcome to life in the fringe, Vega replied. Everyone here is running from something. You're just running from the Imperium's longest memory, the Inquisition. But even they can't hunt everyone forever. You survive, you adapt, you build lives in the spaces they can't reach. That's all any of us can do. She left me to tend the wounded, and I returned to the grim work of battlefield medicine, treating injuries, rationing pain medication, trying to save soldiers who'd sacrificed themselves so others could survive. Just like on Hadrian's Rest. Just like in the Quietus Wing. Just like everywhere humans tried to survive in a galaxy that wanted them dead. We saved who we could. We mourned who we couldn't. We continued existing because stopping wasn't an option. The Imperium had abandoned us, but we'd learned to abandon them right back. And in the end, maybe that was the only victory available. Not triumph, not vindication, not being proven right. Just survival, continued existence. The refusal to die quietly when dying loudly wasn't an option. We were abandoned guardsmen who'd rescued other abandoned guardsmen from the Imperium that abandoned us all. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't the kind of story that appeared in Imperial propaganda. But it was ours, and for soldiers who'd spent 5 years being told they didn't matter, that was enough. 10 years after the raid on Absolution's Gate, I stood on Providence's northern plateau watching the sun set over New Harmony. The city had grown in the decades since our arrival. What had been a refugee settlement of maybe 30,000 had expanded to nearly 100,000, a combination of natural growth and continued refugee influx from Imperial space. People kept fleeing the Imperium, and Providence kept accepting them. We'd become part of that growth. The 400 original evacuees from Hadrian's Rest plus the 43 we'd rescued had integrated into Providence's society. We'd married, had children, built businesses, joined the militia, and generally tried to become more than just traumatized soldiers waiting to die. Some of us had succeeded. Lieutenant Cross was now Commander Cross, leading Providence's militia with the same competence he'd shown on Hadrian's Rest. Captain Vega had established a legitimate trading company, still smuggling on the side, but with enough legal operations to avoid constant Imperial scrutiny. Others hadn't succeeded. 23 suicides in 10 years among our original group. People who'd survived abandonment, factional war, evacuation, and the raid but couldn't survive peace. Couldn't figure out how to exist without purpose, without enemies, without the constant adrenaline of survival. I'd been one of the ones who struggled. The nightmares never fully stopped. The guilt never completely faded. But I'd found something resembling purpose, teaching. Providence had established a military academy, training militia soldiers, preparing defenses against pirates and raiders, building a functional security force. They'd asked me to join the faculty, teaching small unit tactics and survival skills to young people who'd never served in the Guard. I'd resisted initially. Didn't want to be responsible for soldiers again. Didn't want to pass on the skills that had kept me alive at the cost of so many others. But Cross had convinced me. You're not making them into guardsmen, he'd argued. You're teaching them to protect themselves. That's different, better. Providence needs people who can fight when necessary but aren't defined by violence. You can be that teacher, someone who knows war but doesn't glorify it. So I'd accepted, and for 10 years I'd been teaching young people the skills that might keep them alive while also teaching them the costs those skills required. Survival isn't victory, I tell every new class. It's just continued existence. Sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's all you get. But never mistake it for triumph. The Guard taught me how to survive, but it took abandonment to teach me what survival actually cost. Corporal Dane found me on the plateau, his presence announced by footsteps I'd learned to recognize over years of working together. He'd integrated well after rescue, joined the militia, married a former Imperial Navy deserter, and generally built a life that looked nothing like his time on Hadrian's Rest. He'd even let his hair grow long, abandoning the military cuts we'd all maintained during our abandonment. "Commander Cross sent me," he said, settling beside me on the rocks. "Imperial Navy scout ship just translated into system. They're broadcasting investigation codes looking for irregular colonial developments. He wants you at the command center." My heart rate spiked involuntarily. 10 years, and the fear response never fully faded. "They're here for us." "Unknown," Dane replied. "Could be routine patrol, could be they've finally tracked the Absolution's gate raid to Providence. Either way, Cross wants senior leadership assembled before they make contact." I stood, decades of military training overriding the civilian life I'd tried to build. "How many ships?" "Just one. Scout class. Probably advanced reconnaissance for a larger force." "Or they're testing our response," I said. "Seeing if Providence maintains Imperial compliance protocols or if we're actually independent. Either way, this could get complicated." We headed toward the command center, and I couldn't help thinking 10 years. We'd had 10 years of peace, of building lives, of trying to become something other than abandoned soldiers. And now the Imperium was back, reminding us that we'd never actually escaped, just delayed the inevitable. The command center was organized chaos when we arrived. Cross stood at the tactical display, Providence's civilian government representatives beside him, everyone watching the Imperial scout ship maintain a stationary orbit. "They've transmitted standard investigation protocols," Cross reported, "requesting permission to send an inspection team planetside to assess colonial compliance with Imperial standards. Very polite, very official. Very much like they're giving us one chance to cooperate before they designate us hostile." "What's the civilian government's position?" I asked. "They want to comply," one of the representatives said, a woman named Counselor Thrace who'd been governing Providence for 20 years. "We're technically an independent colony, but we've never formally seceded from the Imperium. Refusing inspection would be declaring independence, and that brings consequences we're not prepared for." "So we let them land," I said. "Let them inspect. Hope they don't recognize any former guard who happen to be living here completely legally as civilian refugees." "That's optimistic," Dane observed. "That's all we have," Cross replied. "The alternative is fighting an Imperial scout ship, which would definitely bring a larger response. At least compliance gives us plausible deniability. We're just another fringe colony accepting refugees, conducting legal trade, maintaining minimal Imperial contact. Until they run biometric scans and match us to their records of abandoned guardsmen," I pointed out. "Then we're all facing execution for desertion, rebellion, and raiding an inquisitorial facility." "So we hope their records are incomplete," Cross said. "The Imperium's bureaucracy is vast and inefficient. Maybe we've been forgotten in the 10 years since Hadrian's Rest. Maybe the Inquisition never connected the Absolution's gate raid to us specifically. Maybe we get lucky." "We've never gotten lucky," I said. Then we're due, Cross replied grimly. The Imperial inspection team landed 6 hours later. 3 officials, an administratum clerk, a tech priest from the Mechanicus, and a junior inquisitorial acolyte whose presence made everyone nervous. They were professional, courteous, and absolutely thorough in their documentation of Providence's population, resources, and governance. You maintain a militia, the inquisitorial acolyte observed during their facility tour. His name was Interrogator Vex, and his augmetic eye scanned everything with recording intensity. Commanded by someone with extensive military experience, according to your records. Commander Cross, former... Where did you serve exactly? Former PDF. Cross lied smoothly. Valhallan Colonial Defense before emigrating to the Fringe 10 years ago. Standard career, no deployments of note, no conflicts requiring Imperial intervention. Just defense work until I decided civilian life suited me better. Your techniques suggest guard training, Vex observed. The militia drills I observed are standard Astra Militarum small unit tactics. That's uncommon for former PDF. Many PDF formations receive guard advisors, Cross replied. I learned from the best even if I never officially served. Is that a problem? Unknown, Vex said. Possibly. Depends on whether your background check reveals inconsistencies. My danger sense, which had never fully deactivated, screamed warnings. They suspected, maybe didn't have proof, but suspected that Providence's militia was too competent, too well organized, too obviously led by experienced soldiers. The inspection concluded after 3 days. The administratum clerk filed reports about Providence's tax compliance and resource management. The tech priest assessed our technology for signs of heretical modification. An interrogator Vex compiled a list of individuals whose backgrounds warranted further investigation. Cross, myself, and 37 other former Hadrian's Rest survivors made that list. We'll be monitoring Providence's development, Vex announced during the departure briefing. Your colony shows irregularities, nothing definitively heretical but concerning patterns. Military competence exceeds expectations for a civilian settlement. Refugee acceptance rates suggest possible sympathies with Imperial deserters, and several individuals have backgrounds that resist verification. We're a fringe colony, Councillor Thrace replied calmly. We accept refugees because the Imperium doesn't provide for them. We maintain competent militia because pirates and raiders are constant threats. If our success makes us suspicious, perhaps the Imperium should consider why refugees prefer independence to Imperial governance. Vex's expression suggested he'd filed that statement under seditious commentary requiring follow-up investigation. The Imperium will return, he said. If Providence maintains compliance, demonstrates loyalty, and cooperates with future inspections, you'll be left to your independence. If we discover evidence of harboring deserters, supporting heretical activities, or resisting Imperial authority, consequences will be severe. Choose wisely. They departed, their scout ship translating to warp, leaving behind the promise of continued surveillance. They know, I said once they'd gone. Maybe can't prove it yet, but they know we're here. Yes, Cross agreed, which means we have 2 choices: flee again, scatter across the fringe and abandon everything we've built, or stay, fortify, and prepare for the day the Imperium decides we're worth eliminating. What's the civilian government's position? I asked Councillor Thrace. Stay, she said firmly. Providence has accepted refugees for 2 centuries. We're not abandoning that principle because the Imperium finally noticed us. If they come with violence, we resist. If they come with diplomacy, we negotiate, but we don't flee. That's very noble, I said. Also probably suicidal. The Imperium doesn't negotiate with colonies they've designated hostile. They just eliminate the problem. Then we make ourselves too expensive to eliminate, Thrace replied. Build defenses, establish alliances with other fringe colonies. Become valuable enough that Imperial aggression costs more than tolerating our existence. It's worked for 200 years. It can work longer. Or the Imperium decides to make an example of us, Cross said. Demonstrate what happens to colonies that accept deserters and resist Imperial authority. We could be the warning that keeps other fringe settlements compliant. Then we become a warning worth remembering, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. The Imperium abandoned us on Hadrian's Rest, tried to execute us when we survived, hunted us when we escaped. If they come for us again, at least we'll die on our terms in a place we chose, defending something we built ourselves. That's better than dying forgotten on a toxic world waiting for rescue that never came. 10 years later, 20 years total since Hadrian's Rest, I stood on Providence's northern plateau again, watching another sunset. The Imperium had returned twice more in that decade, each time with larger inspection teams, more intrusive investigations, clearer implications that Providence's independence was temporary and conditional on continued compliance. Each time we'd maintained the fiction. Former PDF, retired merchants, refugees from non-specific conflicts, people whose backgrounds were vague but not definitively criminal. Each time the Imperium had left without taking action. Not because they believed us, but because we weren't yet worth the resources required to eliminate us. We'd become experts at being beneath Imperial notice, at surviving in the margins, at building lives in the spaces where the Imperium couldn't be bothered to look too closely. We'd gone from abandoned guardsmen to forgotten refugees to tolerated colonists. Not free. The Imperium's shadow never lifted completely, but freer than we'd been on Hadrian's Rest, where abandonment meant slow extinction. You're thinking about them again, Cross said, joining me on the plateau. He was older now, 63 standard years, though subjective time made it feel like centuries. The ones we left behind, the 1,000 who died in the bombardment. Always, I admitted. Every sunset, every quiet moment. I think about the selection list, about choosing who deserved to survive, about watching them die from orbit while we fled. We saved who we could, Cross said. Rescued 43 from inquisitorial cells. Built a community here that's given 400 former guard a chance at actual lives. That has to count for something. Does it? I asked. We're still running, still hiding, still looking over our shoulders, waiting for the Imperium to remember we exist and decide we're worth eliminating. Is this really better than dying on Hadrian's Rest with everyone else? Yes, Cross said firmly. Because we're alive. Because we chose this. Because even if the Imperium comes tomorrow and kills us all, we'll have had 20 years of freedom they never gave us permission to have. That's victory, Marcus. Not the kind the Guard taught us. Not glory or triumph or heroic sacrifice. Just continued existence on our own terms, that's all we ever wanted. He was right. But the guilt remained. 43 rescued, 31 killed in the rescue. 1,000 dead in the bombardment, 6,000 gradually dying on Hadrian's Rest before we'd escaped. The mathematics of survival were brutal and unforgiving. But we'd survived anyway. 20 years after abandonment, I finally understood what it meant to be forgotten by the Astra Militarum. It didn't mean the Imperium literally didn't know you existed, they knew. Somewhere in some vast archive, our records were filed, our deployments noted, our abandonment recorded in ledgers no one would ever read. Being forgotten meant they knew and didn't care, that we'd served our purpose, secured Hadrian's Rest, eliminated the Orc threat, prepared the planet for colonization. And once that purpose was fulfilled, our continued existence became an inconvenience. The Imperium could have rescued us, could have sent supply ships, could have extracted us along with the adamantium we'd secured. The resources required would have been negligible by Imperial standards. They chose not to, because we were more useful as casualties than as survivors. Because living guardsmen required continued support, while dead guardsmen required only obituaries. We'd been abandoned not through logistical failure but through calculated decision. Someone somewhere had run the numbers and determined that 6,000 stranded soldiers weren't worth the cost of rescue. That was what abandonment meant, not being forgotten but being deliberately discarded. "The Emperor protects," I said to Cross, testing the words one final time. "No, he doesn't," Cross replied. "But we protect each other. We remember the ones who didn't make it. We honor their sacrifice by surviving when the Imperium expected us to die. That's our rebellion, Marcus. Not violence or defiance, just continued existence. We're the soldiers the Imperium threw away, still here, still alive, still refusing to die. Quietly." "Is that enough?" I asked. "It has to be," he said, "because it's all we have." The sun set over Providence, painting the sky in colors that reminded me of Hadrian's Rest's toxic atmosphere. But these colors were natural, beautiful, the kind of sunset free people got to watch. We'd been abandoned by the Astra Militarum, but we'd learned to abandon them right back. And in the grim darkness of the far future where there was only war, that small act of mutual abandonment was the closest thing to victory any of us would ever know. We were the forgotten, but we remembered. And that remembering was our revenge against an Imperium that had tried to erase us.